So in this video, I'm going to talk about the old lead mines of New England. So we're going to start with some of the oldest mines east of the Spanish colonies, and we're going to end with the Revolutionary War. And these are all mines that I've visited in what I call the Lost Mines Project. It's basically my attempt to try to find the oldest mines in America using LiDAR and using all sorts of digitized maps, resources that are available online like old books, and of course just some good old-fashioned field research, going out and hiking. The goal of this project is to locate these oldest mines and document them to the best of our ability. So that might mean LiDAR mapping the tunnels to create 3D maps. It might just mean photographing and filming the sites. And the goal of this is really history. It's not to actually go out and take minerals from these places or find gold or any other valuable commodities. It's simply to rediscover places where history happened. So in this project, I'm mostly focused on hard rock mines, because with a hard rock mine, there's an excavation left behind that we could find today. With a placer mine, there may be no way to tell where that mine existed hundreds of years ago. Same thing with, for example, bog ore. Bog ore was being gathered and forged into iron as early as Viking times at Lanzo Meadows, around 1000 AD. So they were picking up bog ore and forging it into iron to rebuild their ships, to make rivets and nails. Stuff like that, but I wouldn't really consider the place where the bog ore was collected as a mine. So I'm specifically looking for mines where a vein is found and a shaft or an adit or a trench is left behind and there's evidence of that mine. I'm also specifically looking for European mines. There are lots of sites where Native Americans were mining materials like soapstone or even copper in the Great Lakes region, millennia before the Europeans arrived, but I'm interested in the history of the discovery and colonization of the New World. So in this project, the mines are limited just to European mines. I'm assigning the date of the mine as the date that the deposit was discovered. So we don't need to know the exact date when the pickaxe first struck rock. It's simply when was the mine discovered. So in 1633, a trader named Oldham brought back to the English colonies from the frontier a sample of blacklead, basically graphite. But back then they didn't really know how to ID minerals as well as they do today. So blacklead could mean really anything from silver ore to galena to a lead ore to graphite. So it was about a decade later, in 1644, that two mines were discovered. One in what is today Massachusetts and one in what is today Connecticut. The one in Massachusetts is called Tantiosquis, and there is a deed from the Native Americans to John Winthrop Jr., who was a famous alchemist in the colonies at that time. He had never even visited this site before, but he made sure that he had all the documents proving that he purchased this site and was now the legal owner of it, in case it became a very rich mine site. The one in what is today Connecticut, we don't really have any deed, so I don't think it was included with the Tantiosquis site or part of that site, but it was eventually granted by the colony of Massachusetts to Captain Clark for military service. So the colony of Massachusetts granted him this plot of land that contained the blacklead mine. And we have some info that as early as 1658, Captain Clark made an entrance on the mine, so we know it was worked in the 1650s. And of course, the Tanteusquist Mine was also worked in the 1650s. We have a letter from John Winthrop Jr. to the person he had contracted to mine the site, describing how it should be mined. It should be mined as a trench so that water would run out, and it could be mined using fire setting was one way that the rock was to be fractured. Drilling and blasting had not yet been invented yet, so they would light a fire and that would make the rock brittle, and then it could be fractured and removed. So we have some information on how it was mined, and we have some information on the supplies that were used. So here's some footage from the Tanteusquist Mine. So the mine was worked as a trench, but eventually it went underground, and I don't think that it was worked underground in the 1600s. I don't think it was very heavily worked in the 1600s at all, so it would have been just a shallow trench, and then later on the workings went deeper, and it was worked as late as the 1900s. But we did an exploration in the mine using an ROV to go underwater and see what's still left. Not that this is part of the original 1600s mine, but just to kind of survey what is the extent of this mine.
All right, we're going to send the ROV into the Tanteusquist Mine. We're going to send it in, and it looks like it goes really far down. This new ROV should be able to give us the ability to just follow the cut that they did into the rock as deep as it goes. All right, let's pop it in there. Go forward. Wow.
So you can see in this footage, we went down and immediately started finding artifacts. So we have an old ladder, we have possibly the hand crank to a windlass, and you could see all the wood props are still there shoring up the mine. So all the stalls are still in place, and you can even see a false floor up above you, so there's a wooden platform that they could have walked on, and we're now underneath that. And it's really an alien environment in these flooded mines, because you have this strange hanging organic mass and this very, very surreal environment where it looks like an alien planet, but then you see things that are man-made, and it kind of brings you back to back in time to when there were actually people down here working this. So this is a part of the Tantiosquist Mine. This is probably not where the miners were working early on, but it still gives us a sense for how the graphite was removed from this site. Winthrop thought that this mine would produce silver, just like the rich mines in the Spanish colonies of New Spain and Peru, and to a lesser degree, New Mexico. With the proceeds from this silver, he wanted to build a college of alchemy in New London, a town he founded in Connecticut. This college of alchemy would be open to alchemists from all over the world, despite their religion. But it never happened. The silver ore simply turned out to be graphite, and although graphite was still somewhat valuable at that time, it wasn't enough to fund the building of this college of alchemy in the wilderness of the New World. So the next mine I went in search of was the Clark Blacklead Mine, the one in Connecticut, the one that was found with the Tanteusquist Mine in 1644, that Captain Clark began working in 1658. I wanted to find this mine because this is the oldest mine in Connecticut. It's on a hill called Aquebetuck, also known as Lead Mine Hill. We know it was right on the border of Ashford and Union, and there's a stream called Lead Mine Brook, called Lead Mine Road. So there's enough clues here to hopefully find this mine. So I used LiDAR to look over the entire hill called Lead Mine Hill, and I found a couple anomalies that I went out to look for, but they turned out to be nothing. So this mine is still eluding me. I think I know where it could have been based on the historical description. It's possibly under this farmer's field. As early as 1813, it was said that the mine was filled up with stones from a farmer's field. We have clues that it was near a swamp, that it was near the road. This location here is probably where the mine was, and it was most likely filled in by the farmer looking for a place to get rid of his stones. And it may be something that can be excavated in the future to reveal the oldest mine in Connecticut. It's also important because this mine was worked during the Revolutionary War. The graphite was removed. I think 400 pounds of graphite was removed and sent to northwest Connecticut to the iron foundries where cannons were being cast, because the graphite was needed for casting these cannons that helped win the American independence from England. So what was the next lead mine that was found in New England after the black lead mines of Massachusetts and northern Connecticut? So in 1657, two men from Farmington were exploring the frontier lands of Connecticut, and they came across a deposit of black lead. So again, this could mean lead or it could mean graphite. So they struck up a deal for a huge tract of land, basically 8 miles from where the black lead was found. So again, this was not mined in 1657, but I'm assigning that date because that's when it was discovered. We don't know when the black lead was mined, but it helped contribute to this very important tract of land, which later became Waterbury and Harwinton. So the discovery of this deposit was fairly important in Connecticut history. So the mine was again found in the 1700s, and it was operated 2 men, Jonathan Belcher and William Partridge from Boston. So Jonathan Belcher was a Boston merchant, and he would later become the governor of Massachusetts, I believe in 1730. But before that time, he operated 2 copper mines in Connecticut, the Simsbury Mine and the Wallingford Mine. So 2 very rich copper mines. So you find his name attached to this lead mine in what was then Farmington. So Belcher had a team of miners in Simsbury and Wallingford, English and German miners. He could have sent those miners over to Farmington to work this mine. They were driving tunnels and sinking shafts at the copper mines. They could have easily extracted lead from this lead mine in what was then Farmington. We don't know how the mine was worked or what it looked like, because again, the mine was lost after that time, and people went out looking for it. There's even the tale of a minister who had his congregation just fan out in the woods looking for this mine, and if they found it, he would ring a bell. It was never found, though, and even on the 1800s Beers map, it shows an area along Lead Mine Brook where supposedly the lead mine was, but there's no indication of a mine in that area at all. There's no LiDAR anomalies to be found that could possibly be a mine. There's some clues, though. One book says that it was located behind a certain person's house, and you could find the workings to the mine. I did go back there to look for it, and I did find a deposit that was worked, but it was not lead. So we do have some very vague clues to help us find this mine. We know that it was near a place called the English Grass Meadow. We know it was near a plum tree field. We know it was near a couple rivers. We know where Lead Mine Brook is, and we know that it was somewhere near there. So today it seems that the mine was located where Thomaston Dam is now, and that it was wiped out during the time that the dam was built. So this is some information from MnDAT. And I have to agree with this because it seems like the clues seem to put it in that general area. And one other important clue is that there is a lead deposit on that site that's still there. So the mine itself, the workings, whether it was a shaft or a trench or an adit, have now been obliterated. So there is a working for lead back behind the area of the Thomaston Dam, and this is probably most likely a continuation of the same vein that was worked by Belcher in the 1700s. So since we're in this railroad cut, it's very unlikely that this working existed during the time of the original discoverers, but this is probably something like it would have looked like back then. It was probably a trench that was worked in and then maybe followed underground. So let's move forward a few years, and we have a mining grant dated 1661 for, again, John Winthrop Jr., the person who actually secured the charter for the colony of Connecticut from Charles II. Before that time, Connecticut was just an illegal colony. So this is a very prominent person, and as an alchemist, he would have had all the books and knowledge he needed in order to mine these metals. But there's no proof that anything was actually mined here in the 1660s. When I went in search of this site, I did find some very small-scale adits that had really strong mineralization and a good indication that there was some sort of valuable minerals there because of all the crystals in this vein that was outcropping on the surface. The other mystery is that in the collection that John Winthrop Jr.'s grandson sent to the Royal Society was a very rare mineral called Columbite that was labeled as being found near John Winthrop Jr.'s home in New London. The only thing is, Columbite is not found anywhere in New London, but it is found in Middletown. So Middletown is not confirmed as having a 17th century date, but there is lead there, and we'll get back to Middletown in a few minutes. So there's one more mine that was worked in the 17th century, and that's the Northampton lead mine. And this is also known as the Loudville Mine or the Manhan Lead Mine. So this mine was discovered by a man who would kind of go out and roam the land, and he discovered this roughly in 1678 or 1679. Meetings were called in town to decide what to do with the mine, and it was agreed that it would be mined. But it doesn't really seem like there was any significant work done at this early date. And again, there wasn't really a tradition of mining among the people that settled in Massachusetts and Connecticut at those early dates. They were really farmers. So it was probably a good attempt, but nothing was really found until later in the 1700s. And there were some men that were working a mine in Roxbury, Connecticut for silver and lead that was started about 1750. So the Roxbury mine was later famous for this siderite iron ore that was really high quality. So the people that were working it, the Bronson brothers and actually Ethan Allen of Revolutionary War fame, had a full crew of miners. There were several slaves. So there was a pretty good crew of miners there. They had even sunk a 175-foot deep shaft in 1763 and 1764. So, I mean, this was a major feat. But in 1765, the whole entourage left Roxbury, including Ethan Allen, Charles Scott of Revolutionary War fame, and headed up to Northampton. And the whole operation was being funded by Samson Simpson, a wealthy New York merchant who was actually one of the founding members of the New York City Chamber of Commerce. So they all went up to Northampton, and this is one of the first mines that we know of that actually had water power for pumping out the mine. And the mines in Europe used water power. They had water wheels to power these pumps to dewater the mines. I even visited a mine in Germany that had an underground water wheel to pump out the mine. So this whole channel had to be dug a mile or two long to get water to the mine. You could still see the channel there today, and there would have been a water wheel, and it would have pumped out this shaft. So this is a pretty interesting site. So there's all sorts of stories about Ethan Allen being scolded by a local minister for his foul language and jokes, and even the people at the mine were fined for pumping out the water from the mine on Sunday. So working on Sunday, they had the pumps going to keep the water out of the mine, and they were fined, I think, 5 shillings or something like that, just for keeping the mine dewatered. So there were still these very strict puritanical leanings in this part of Massachusetts, and they didn't take kindly to these people from Connecticut. So I went out to the mine to look for any sort of remains that may be from the 1700s or any indications of adits or underground entrances. So there is an old map that indicates a couple adits and an air shaft. And I wanted to go out and take a look at these and see if there was any underground workings that were still explorable. So I was able to find the adit, and from there I simply took a bearing off the old map in the direction of the air shaft, walked that direction, and I came right to this amazing stone-lined hole in the ground that went straight down. Unfortunately, it was plugged about 25 feet down, but it looks like a well. But this had to have been the air shaft to this 1,000-foot long adit. So another mine that I believe was being operated by Samson Simpson in Connecticut was the Middletown Mine, the one that John Winthrop Jr. received the grant to in 1661. So it was being worked before the Revolutionary War by an English colonel named Colonel James, and I believe it was being worked by the British military, by the miners and sappers. So this was a military unit that's similar to engineers that would have been responsible for digging tunnels under the front lines and setting explosives. This was a military tactic, and I believe that's what's known as sapping. But I believe these people were working this mine for silver before the Revolutionary War, and there's descriptions of the workings here that say that the mine was very scientifically laid out. That's not how it would have been mined by local people in the area. It had to have been worked by either people from Cornwall or people who were trained in mining who knew what they were doing. But at the start of the Revolutionary War, the English were kicked out of this mine. The mine was confiscated, and it was used to produce lead for the war effort. And it's said that some of the lead from this mine was used in some really notable battles during the Revolutionary War. The only problem is the Americans who were mining it didn't really know what they were doing, and there was problems with flooding. This was a pretty good-sized mine, but without the know-how of Cornishmen or Germans, it wasn't of much use to the Americans during the war, and it was closed down. The mine was rediscovered, and we have a prominent geologist who visited the site and very unscientifically said that the ground sounded hollow in certain places. This is not the type of description you usually get from a geologist. But just a decade or so later, in the 1850s, a mining company bought the land and rediscovered the entrances to the mine. And when they entered, they found tools and wooden artifacts that were left in place. There was even a wooden ladder that was still usable. This mine is huge. There were 3 levels and about 1,500 feet of workings. Fortunately, today, the entrance to the mine is again lost. There's only a few smaller adits scattered around the riverbed, but the main adit to the mine has vanished. But just last year, I noticed that there was a tree that had blown over in a windstorm, and under this tree was exposed a timbered adit. So the timber set that makes up the entrance to this mine was exposed under this tree. So we now know where the main entrance is to the mine. The only problem is that the wood that once held back all this dirt had rotted, and the dirt from the walls and ceiling of this tunnel had sealed up the mine. There is still water draining out of this adit, and there's even an original ventilation pipe. These mines use these square wooden pipes to get air into the further reaches of the mine, and it's still there, and there's even water trickling out of this ventilation pipe. So just beyond this dirt is an enormous mine that dates back to before the Revolutionary War. But Middletown was not the only mine that was worked for lead during the Revolutionary War. There's another mine in Berlin, Connecticut, called the Kensington Mine. And this was a small-scale working, but it does have Revolutionary War history. The only thing I was able to find of the Kensington Mine is this small tunnel right on the riverbank. And I'm assuming this was where they mined some lead minerals. But there's an excellent description of the mine written in quill pen, which is very hard to decipher, talking about blasting and removing ore. But these clues lead me to believe that there is a Revolutionary War lead mine somewhere on this river, still just waiting to be found. So the last mine in this video is the Wilton Silver Mine, and it also, like the Middletown Mine, supposedly produced lead that was used for the war effort. So I do have an old map that shows the locations of the Wilton Silver Mine, and the first location I was able to find using LiDAR, I was able to spot a tailings pile on the LiDAR maps and went out and found the shaft that went down 75 feet, which is now filled with water. The second location I haven't been able to find yet, so there's still another working of the Wilton Silver Mine out there, I believe. So I hope you enjoyed seeing some of the lead mines that I've explored over the last couple years. And this video is by no means the extent of all the old lead mines in New England, but this is just a good sample of some of the interesting sites, and it just goes to show you that there's a lot of history right below our feet just waiting to be found.